London, August 15, 1947. In a marble-walled room at the Bank of England, clerks are tallying requests for gold conversion from central banks across 3 continents. The requests exceed available reserves by a factor of 12. By noon, the Chancellor has drafted the quiet instruction, no more conversions without Treasury approval. No announcement. No panic. Just a polite administrative delay that will become permanent. Within 18 months, the pound sterling, reserve currency for a quarter of the Earth's surface, will lose that status forever. The ledger always knows first. The diplomats find out later. This is not a story about one empire. It is a story about all of them. Because for 700 years, across 4 continents and 5 reserve currencies, the same pattern has repeated with mechanical precision. Empires do not collapse randomly. Their currencies die first, and they die the same way, in the same sequence, for the same reasons. By the end of this, you will be able to read the warning signs. Not to profit from them. Not to escape them. But to see the machinery while it is still running. The pattern begins the same way every time, with trust. A reserve currency is not imposed by force. It is adopted by choice, because merchants and foreign governments believe it will hold value better than their own. The Portuguese real became Europe's first true reserve currency in the 1450s not because Lisbon had the largest army, but because it had the most reliable gold content. The Cruzado coin was standardized, difficult to counterfeit, and backed by the gold flowing in from West African trade routes. By 1500, contracts from Antwerp to Venice were denominated in Portuguese currency. The real was the unit of account for a trading world. Then comes the seduction. A reserve currency gives its issuer an extraordinary privilege, the ability to buy real goods with paper promises. Portugal could import spices, hire soldiers, and build fleets by issuing coins and, later, letters of credit that foreigners willingly accepted. This is the first phase, and every empire mistakes it for strength. Between 1500 and 1540, Portugal expanded its monetary supply by roughly 400%, funding expeditions to India, Brazil, and the Spice Islands. The money flowed out. The goods flowed in. It felt like wealth. But here is the mechanism they all miss. When you are the reserve currency, your money becomes the savings vehicle for the world. Foreign merchants hold your currency not to spend it, but to store it. You are no longer just a country. You are the global bank. And banks have a dangerous temptation to issue more claims than they can redeem. Portugal began doing exactly that by the 1550s. The crown debased the real 3 times between 1555 and 1580, reducing silver content to pay for wars in North Africa and administrative costs across an empire it could no longer afford. Foreign holders noticed. They always do. The Dutch guilder rose for the same reason the real fell. In 1609, the Amsterdam Wisselbank was founded with an iron rule: every guilder note was backed by full-weight coin in the vault, available for inspection and redemption on demand. No debasement. No exceptions. For nearly 80 years, that promise held. By 1650, the guilder was the currency of choice for the Baltic grain trade, the East Indies spice routes, and even London's financial markets. The bank's ledger was trusted more than most kingdoms' armies. Amsterdam became the richest city in Europe not by conquering land, but by offering the safest ledger. Then the cycle turned. The second phase is always the same: the creditor becomes the debtor. Holland fought 3 wars with England between 1652 and 1674, and a grinding land war with France that lasted until 1713. The costs were staggering. By 1780, Dutch public debt had risen to roughly 200% of national revenue, by most estimates the highest in Europe. The Wisselbank, once a fortress of sound money, began lending directly to the Dutch East India Company and, quietly, to the government itself. The full reserve promise eroded. In 1790, inspectors discovered the bank had issued 3 times more claims than it held in metal. The guilder did not collapse overnight. It bled slowly, losing 50% of its purchasing power against silver between 1750 and 1800. Foreign merchants shifted their reserves to London. The British pound followed an identical script, only larger. After the Napoleonic Wars, Britain emerged as both the world's dominant military power and its most trusted currency. The pound was fixed to gold at £3.17 per ounce, and that peg held for nearly a century. By 1900, more than 60% of global trade was invoiced in sterling. The City of London was the world's clearinghouse. But World War I shattered the balance. Britain borrowed heavily, first from its own citizens, then from the United States. By 1917, Britain owed American banks more than $4 billion, a sum larger than the entire British gold reserve. The creditor had become the debtor. In 1925, Winston Churchill, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, returned Britain to the gold standard at the pre-war parity. It was a decision born of pride, an attempt to restore the pound's prestige by pretending the war's costs had not happened. The result was predictable. British goods became unaffordable abroad. Unemployment spiked. Gold flowed out of London and into New York and Paris. By 1931, the Bank of England had lost half its gold reserves. On September 21 of that year, Britain abandoned the gold standard permanently. The pound floated, and within 5 years it had lost 25% of its value. The reserve currency crown passed to the United States, formalized at Bretton Woods in 1944. Which brings us to the third phase, the flight. This is not a sudden crash. It is a quiet rotation, a shift in where the world chooses to store value. The United States entered World War II as the world's largest creditor. By 1970, it had become the largest debtor. The Vietnam War, the Great Society programs, and the Cold War arms race were funded not by taxation but by printing dollars under the assumption that foreign central banks would hold them forever. They did, until they did not. In 1971, France and Switzerland began requesting gold conversion for their dollar reserves. By August, the outflow was unsustainable. On August 15, President Nixon closed the gold window. The mechanism was identical to the 1931 sterling crisis, separated only by scale and currency. The dollar did not disappear. It remained the dominant reserve. But the promise behind it changed. It became a floating abstraction, backed not by metal but by the belief that the United States would remain the least bad option. Which empire do you think we are most like right now? Tell me below. Here is the false belief every empire holds at the peak: we are different. Portugal believed the spice trade was eternal. Holland believed the Wisselbank's reputation was unshakable. Britain believed the empire's reach made the pound indispensable. America believes its technology, military reach, and network effects make the dollar irreplaceable. They are half right. The currency does not vanish overnight. But the privilege erodes the moment the issuer prints faster than the world is willing to absorb. And that moment is not announced. It is revealed in the data, in falling demand for your bonds, in rising yields despite your central bank's interventions, in foreign central banks quietly diversifying reserves into gold, euros, yuan, or even commodities. These are not predictions. They are the same breadcrumbs visible in Amsterdam in 1780, in London in 1931, and, if you know what to look for, in the flow of funds data today. The pattern is a ratchet, not a circle. Each reserve currency lasts longer and fails larger than the one before. The Portuguese real lasted roughly 90 years as the dominant reserve. The guilder lasted about a century and a quarter. The pound held for just under 200 years if you count from the end of the Napoleonic Wars to Bretton Woods. The dollar has held formal reserve status for 80 years and counting. But the ratchet tightens. The debts are larger. The promises are harder to keep. And the world's trust, once broken, does not return on request. You cannot time this. You cannot trade it. What you can do is learn to see it. Watch the debt-to-revenue ratio. Watch which foreign governments are buying your bonds and which are selling. Watch whether your central bank is still setting the price of money or merely reacting to it. Watch the gap between what your government promises and what it can tax. These are not ideology. They are accounting. And the ledger, across 7 centuries, has never lied. The real transition is not political. It is monetary. Empires do not lose wars and then lose their currency. They lose their currency and then lose the ability to fight wars, fund infrastructure, and command respect. The sequence matters. The currency dies first because it is the measure of all the promises a state has made. And when the promises exceed the capacity to deliver, the measure breaks before the state does. Rome debased the denarius to pay soldiers it could no longer afford. Spain drowned in American silver and still defaulted 4 times in 60 years. Weimar printed to pay reparations it could not tax. Every case is unique in detail and identical in structure. The mechanics are older than flags. We are not at the end of the cycle. But we are no longer at the beginning. The question is not whether the pattern will repeat. It always does. The question is whether you can see the machinery before the room goes dark. Empires fall the same way for the same reasons, and the money always tells the story first. Subscribe, and we will read the next chapter together.